to Season 2, Episode 16 of the Bithell Games Podcast. I'm Alexander Slawinski.
And I'm Mike Bithell.
Each week we talk games, what it's like to make games, and the random stuff we don't generally find time to talk about because we are playing and or making games. Show notes. This is it. Last episode of this show being intercontinental. Next episode will take place in London, along with future episodes for the foreseeable future. Thanks for all of your...
I don't like the foreseeable there. You're 1 foot out the door already, Alexander.
Oh, well, your country might decide to put my foot out the door. They might actually shove my butt out the door, but we'll see how that goes over the next 2 years.
We'll see.
But thanks for all the new reader mail. A lot of good ones, actually. So much so that I had to pick and choose this week.
How exciting!
It is exciting. But so yes, everyone who sent a letter in, we will get to that. But please continue to send in your questions because they're great. They're really solid ones. So keep those coming to contact@bithelgames.com. That's contact@bithelgames.com. Mike, what are you playing?
I'm playing Prey at the moment.
How was that? Because you were... When we played it at DICE, you were a little...
I wasn't blown away, was I?
You were not blown away.
So we played it. We were very fortunate to get a demo. Both of us played, I think, the first kind of 45 minutes of the PC version. I think that's about right. Mm-hmm. And it was cool. I think, though... I'm not sure it's a game that demos well, because it is kind of old school PC in a lot of ways, in that you're kind of dropped into it without much explanation. There are, lots of things like the UI is there from the start. Like, there is no kind of, now you have the map screen, now you have this screen. Everything's just kind of thrown at you. And I think in a demo context, that kind of feels messy and overwhelming. I also think, to be honest, that some of the very early game storytelling in the version I played wasn't as good as it is in the final version. There were just lots of little aesthetic choices and bugs that they clearly tweaked before the game actually launched, which kind of improved it. And I think as well, I never enjoy games when I play them, demoed at an event, because I'm very aware that I have, the game's developer or publisher kind of often looking over your shoulder. You've got, you've got a time limit, so you're kind of trying to see as much content as you can. And it's definitely a game that benefits from taking your time. I think there's an environment. I've basically been in one room for the last kind of 45 minutes of gameplay, just trying out stuff and seeing what I can do and how the game works, which is definitely something you can't do in a demo. So I'm having a good time with it. It reminds me a lot. It's very System Shocky. I think a lot of people are referring to BioShock with it, and I can see what they mean. Definitely, like, just down to that kind of Art Deco look. But in terms of how it plays, it to me it feels more System Shocky in that it's way less linear than I've seen.
Do you want to know why?
Why is that?
Because you're old enough to reference that.
Because I remember System Shock.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing with BioShock definitely felt like a kind of a hybrid of kind of that classic System Shock kind of Looking Glass stuff. That kind of, that non-linear kind of environmental stuff, Deus Ex, Thief, that kind of thing as well. But kind of made more linear, made more kind of, you go here, then you go here, then you go here. It was very much with BioShock, I remember a sense of there being missions and progression. I think you could backtrack, but you were not encouraged to. Whereas I think the fact that, the open world game has become so prevalent in the time since BioShock, you now get this situation where I guess Prey is sort of BioShock meets everything Arcane have made meets an open world game. And what you get at the opposite end of that is you get back to System Shock. You get back to that kind of, this is a believable environment. You travel around, you travel between, with just enough kind of innovations that becomes really interesting. One of the things that I love in it is, obviously you're traveling around this space station, and you can, as you'd expect, there are doors. You go through the doors, the airlocks within the structure. You get in an elevator, you go to different floors, all of that stuff. But at any time, as long as you've unlocked airlocks in an area, you can actually climb out of an airlock and spacewalk around the outside of the station to another place, which presents its own challenges and interesting stuff. And just things like that, just adding up and making this feel like a really believable, you can go anywhere space, it's great, and I love that genre when I was younger. It's great to see it coming back. This idea of creating locations rather than corridors. I want that to continue. I hope it does. I think Prey's doing relatively well critically and commercially. We'll see. But I want more of this. I want this to become the norm. And there's just what I also, if I can just go on a little bit more about the game, it's also got just enough kind of innovation in there in terms of the gameplay that it's interesting. A lot of people are talking about the glue gun, which is this kind of, I guess it's this game's gravity gun in terms of being an interesting mechanic. Essentially, you can shoot these kind of globules, these kind of football-sized globules of glue, of goop, and with it and then they solidify, and you can use that as a weapon to kind of freeze enemies, but you can also shoot it around the environment and use them as physics objects. You can make kind of a staircase for yourself. You can kind of, it feels like you're hacking the environment. Of course you're not. You're taking advantage of the opportunities the designer came up with, but you can kind of build yourself a pathway or make a barrier that enemies can't get through, or mess around in that way. That's really neat. The thing that actually I think I'm really interested in how they use it actually, and as the game goes on, is something in the game which is very cheekily called the looking glass technology, which is cute. So if you played the original Prey, right?
Yes.
So Prey was the other game that did portals. Do you remember this? In Prey, you had this kind of portal-based gameplay. They were tied to the environment. You weren't shooting them, but you had some levels where you were jumping in and out of portals. And, obviously there was the other game with portals that did it in a much more kind of intuitive, kind of player-led way, and I think therefore led Prey to get forgotten for that. But one thing this game does, which is really neat, is it has this idea of augmented reality, where the object, so you look into essentially like a window, and then behind that window is a virtual world or a recording of a virtual world, and then by walking around you kind of parallax and look around in that environment through the window, if that's making any sense. Kind of like a virtual window you can look through and see anything. And they use that
kind of like Titanfall 2?
Imagine Titanfall 2, but your view of that other world is limited to this kind of in-game window. You can't walk through the window. You can't go into that world. You can just look at it.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's used in the game a few times just to do kind of cool visual moments of like a virtual hologram environment or a recording of something. But where it gets really interesting is where there is a moment. I don't think this is a massive spoiler. This is a couple of hours into the game, but it's a massive game where you have 3 of these view screens kind of back to back in a triangle formation, and they're playing a recording of the room you're in. So you're looking into this glass and you can see the history of this room through it. So you're seeing, a chair, and then if you move your view so the glass is in front of that, you can see the character sitting in that chair when the video was made. And you can kind of walk around, you're walking around in an empty room, looking through this portal into a previous room. And they use that to hide some secrets and do some gameplay by like intentionally getting you to look at different things than you're meant to be looking at. And stuff like that, just it's that thing we've talked about. I think we've talked about it on the show even, but we definitely talk about it off the show. It's that doing that stuff that you don't have to do, going that extra mile and doing kind of actually genuinely original, innovative stuff. They could totally have gotten away with making essentially a BioShock clone, and it would still have gotten as much praise it's getting. But those little innovations in gameplay...
As much praise as it's getting.
Oh, I see what you did there. So I like it. I don't fully understand why it's called Prey, but I think it's a game that's holding my attention. It's interesting. I'm very much into this fashion for, I guess, what was the looking glass genre. Now it's the arcane genre of those believable worlds where you can go anywhere and you have these kind of simulation style interactions between everything you're doing. I want more of that, more games like that. What are you playing?
Actually, I haven't been playing much. I'll get to that, but I'm curious now because you did play Dishonored 2.
I did.
You've played Prey now. So has Arcane picked up the torch? Like,
I bounce off of the Dishonored games, and it's something I only ever tend to get a couple of levels into them. I think the problem I have with Dishonored that I don't have with Prey is difficulty. Dishonored obviously is leaning towards the stealth and is leaning towards the kind of the trickier gameplay, the kind of it's the thief, right, in that kind of context. But because of that, I find myself, and this is probably just because I'm an older gamer, probably not as good as a lot of other gamers, I get frustrated, I get scared, and when I'm scared, I don't want choice. And I really run into that problem with the Dishonored games, where I know there's all these awesome opportunities and choices, but I'm running out of health so fast, and I'm under so much pressure that I don't want to go down any of those corridors, because everything down all those corridors is going to murder me horribly. Whereas I think with Prey, Prey is more down the System Shock Deus Ex end of things, where because I'm well armed, and I feel secure, I want to explore more. They do in it this thing, it's all over the marketing materials, this idea of the mimics, which are these kind of they're face huggers or head crabs that can disguise themselves as any object in the world. So at any time as you're walking around, you can get a jump scare of this thing's gonna, any chair in the world, any mug, any object in the world can at any moment turn into something that wants to kill you. And that's relatively, and later you get the ability to spot where they are or whatever. But for a big chunk of the game, they're these jump scares waiting to happen. But what's great about that is they're not mega damaging at a certain point, and they're there, so there's not the anticipation of that fear. You just go, well, I'm going to get jumped at every 2 or 3 minutes in this game, and they become almost not scary as a result. They become kind of routine. Whereas something in Dishonored where, one bad guy in Dishonored can absolutely ruin your run through, especially if, like me, you want to play a stealth game perfectly. It becomes very kind of repetitive and scary. Whereas, in Prey, I'm getting on with it more. But I like that. I like that there is that genre difference. I like that a studio is producing a bunch of games on the theme, and they're creating enough diversity within those games that I can have a favorite. That's cool.
Also, shout out to Mark Brown, Game Maker's Toolkit, because this entire segment has pretty much touched on videos that he's been doing.
He's very much into this genre as well, isn't he?
There are certainly several videos on. I believe he calls them the simulation genres. What are they? That Deus Ex-y Looking Glass. There's a really good video he's done on that, and then he just did a 3-part series on Dead Space, which is also interesting because it shows the transition in Dead Space from being horror led, with some action, and then Dead Space 2 being much more action focused, but still holding on to some of those horror roots, and then Dead Space 3 just being a full blown action game, and what gets comparing and contrasting and what gets lost in those transitions. Also, Mark, I strongly disagree on Dead Space 2 things, because that's the best one in the genre. But moving on. It is. So what I've been playing, I said goodbye to my Team Joy folks who I play Battlefield with pretty much every single week this week. So I'll be starting a new crew up over in the
merry old England,
in the English territories. So contact at bithellgames.com if you're down for some Battlefield 1 on PS4.
I just sold my copy of Battlefield 1, so I will not be able to join you.
Oh no.
That's all right though. That's fine.
Now it's time for what's going on at the studio. There is so much going on right now. Almost none of it we can talk about. So I would actually like to lean into something that Mr. Bithell asked on Twitter.
Oh God, we're using my Twitter for content now.
Because I think it's interesting and kind of important, because there were a couple of responses that I would like to take on directly, because there's stuff to explore there. So the question was, what could this is what you wrote on Twitter. Question for today, : what could/should more established small studios, parenthetical like us, be doing to help the community? And you clarified to say, I meant community of devs, not audience, although the audience-focused answers are super interesting too.
I think I was clear in the original tweet. I feel I can say that to the podcast audience. I feel that original tweet said our community, which I felt it was clear, but I was happy to clarify it.
So you did get some good answers, and some of them are solid, and we're trying to tackle them, and some of them just it's someone just not knowing what our sort of lives are like. I want to go through a few of these. So one of them you got from Johnson Xiao at Blue Tie Casual. I think simply being approachable is enough, and that may mean initiating conversations within smaller developers, which you responded, I just don't have the bandwidth for that, which is, I think, one of the key...
Sorry, to which one? I feel I did that with emails. There was one about emails. Is that the one you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so to be very clear, I will absolutely have a friendly chat with anyone I meet about any questions they have. That was specifically, I think, referring to email, correct? Yeah, that was...
Yeah, it was going into just extended conversations, and it did come up a lot. Laura Nugem said consulting and membership would be great to have a platform that connects indies with more established studios, and it's the bandwidth thing, right? Like we do have to get our games done as well, so there's only so much time to get things.
I'm not sure it's an optimized solution. I think often you'll talk to kind of younger developers. And frankly, and this isn't a slight on anyone, but there will be the same question. You know, they'll have there's lots of overlap in the kinds of questions you get asked. And I think it's much more optimized to answer that question kind of in, once or twice to as many people as you can, rather than doing, individual one-on-one. I feel like I'd be copy and pasting a lot of answers, which maybe that's the solution. I don't know, but that's why I'm probably more drawn towards doing Q&As and public events and things like this podcast, where you can actually hopefully answer questions and lots of people can get the answer. Even people who didn't ask the question, I guess that's a big reason we do the mailbox kind of stuff in this, right? Read mail, yeah.
And specifically towards the platform that connects indies, this is getting into sensitive territory here, but I do think it's worth pointing out. Is that yes, game journalists also had a place that they thought they could discuss concepts and sort of learn off of each other, and that was kind of violated and then put all over the internet in some non-flattering, non-contextually appropriate ways. So I get nervous now, and I wasn't even involved in that, but I saw a lot of my friends who are good people getting their name just like splashed around in very negative ways. So having a place where, younger devs can ask questions and people who have been inside the system and know how things work reply, I could see that absolutely being used in essentially being weaponized.
And we've seen that. I mean,
yes.
there are these kind of communities. There's a very popular kind of indie mailing list, which I actually declined being in because exactly the fear you're describing. And then I think actually not long after I declined, I saw someone posting up quotes from that. There is no privacy on the internet. I think this is something that, frankly, the generations coming up get better than my generation, but nothing is private on the internet. So it's tough to have those kind of conversations. That's why having those conversations in person is often a lot easier, because I'm hopeful that I'm not being recorded when I'm talking to you in person. But even that is, potentially naive. There are like Slack groups and things. I'm a member of a couple of kind of indie Slack groups where I try and kind of give advice, but I would never say anything on any of those platforms that I wouldn't be comfortable saying publicly on Twitter. I'd also say that Twitter is quite a good platform to ask questions. Often I'll answer questions on there. I don't go in for the whole kind of these mega answers because, again, bandwidth, but also I just don't think it's necessarily what I'm best at. But I do think there are ways of approaching devs and asking questions. I just don't think privacy, it's where that comes up against privacy for both parties. It's difficult. It's I did a good example of this was the shout out I did for a junior animator to kind of help us on a project we're working on. And I was initially doing that all in public. And I noticed that I wasn't getting many people sending work. The second I opened my DMs and said, hey, send me over stuff, it blew up because suddenly people could privately show stuff. And it often, it's a mistake that I make occasionally, is we're very cautious about our privacy and making sure that we're not saying stuff in public that we don't want to say in public. but it goes both ways, and the other party can feel the same way. So it's an imperfect system. It's a tough one, and doing one-on-ones,
and it does stink because there was a time not so long ago, maybe like a little less than a decade ago, where there was this idea starting to bubble up about transparency, about discussing things openly, discussing things publicly, and both sides of the aisle, right? Where it was like devs trying to, understand media better. It was media trying to understand devs better and understand how the system works and how the business works, and trying to have this, much more open approach. And that was all weaponized. And
also dev to dev, which I guess is what we're more focused on here. That I never know when I'm talking, and I've had this where I've been talking to a young dev, and I've seen that go public. It happened to me one time where a dev I like and respect a lot, but I'd given some advice to that dev in a kind of a private context. I think literally like at a bar, and then I saw that quoted to me and referenced to me in a Gamma Sutra blog post that dev had written. Mike Bithell told me to do this. And I mean, it wasn't a massively controversial viewpoint, so that was fine. But again, this kind of expectation of privacy is very tough to deal with, because I'm sure that dev didn't think they were doing anything wrong, but to me that felt like a private conversation being put up in public. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one to navigate. And I think that sometimes, because of the asymmetry of that relationship, people don't notice. People don't, when you have someone who follows you on Twitter, they don't realize, the amount of stuff that's getting sent to you every day on Twitter as someone who's got a few more followers, and it does. I think actually someone commented that they were very aware of that asymmetry of followers and how that affects the way people communicate. And it's true. For me, I get a lot of noise, and it's sometimes hard to kind of cut through that and talk to people who need advice.
Amy Graves from Square Enix Collective.
Yes, very cool person.
Yeah, said sharing wisdom about parts of the industry that indies may not know about, or how to tackle marketing, PR, etc. And they are trying to create a blog that covers those aspects. And they're getting
good people writing on it as well, which is cool.
Yeah, and I think that's incredibly helpful. That sort of aspect. And one of the things we don't really talk about it because it's not cool to talk about these things, because indie and being,
because if this podcast is one thing, it's cool.
It's totally cool.
This is the coolest podcast on the internet.
But genuinely, if you are getting information from these top tier folks, recognize, please recognize that you are getting in terms of consulting or something along those lines, these people could easily charge hundreds of pounds,
and they do
hundreds of pounds, or dollars or whatever, a lot of money to provide this information to corporations, or other folks who just simply don't have the time to do the research. I know that back when I was a journalist, I couldn't do this because of ethical reasons, but I could absolutely charge $300 an hour to talk to someone who just simply didn't have the time to look at the research, things. And
that's how you are with Battlefield, right? Battlefield, people have to pay you a few $100 an hour just to play Battlefield with you. I remember you saying that. It's a brilliant racket.
No, but it's this.
You're right. There's a cash value to this information.
Right. This information is available publicly, but recognize that this information isn't free. If you try to approach these people individually, or try to contact them to come into your studio or something along those lines, they could easily, and they it wouldn't be shocking for them to charge several hundred an hour to do that. I think right.
I think we're totally within their rights, but I also think that the indie side of things, there is lots of information sharing.
There is.
And definitely, if you ever see me at an event and want to have a chat, and I'm sure Alexander feels the same way, as long as I'm not literally running off somewhere, I'll gladly have a chat with you about any questions you'd have, or and I do blog posts, and I should probably do more of that stuff, but I will answer questions, but for me, it's just about optimizing. How do I get that information. The great thing about conferences is if I'm going to a conference, I've already written out that time I'm not going to get any work done. So at a conference, honestly, often I'm happy to have a conversation because I literally don't have anything else to do. So it's fine. But optimizing, how can I convey this information to as many people as possible? Or how can I help as many people as possible? That's a big part of my stuff going forward, because helping a lot of individuals a little is less exciting to me than helping a lot of individuals a lot. I think that's got to be the objective.
Yeah, I mean the key point I'm trying to put out there is that this information that you're seeing on those sites has value. It really does. There are people who pay good money for that information, and this person who's writing that is providing it, if you're reading it like on these types of sites, for free. And that there just has to be some recognition in that it's not, they're not just talking for talking's sake. There is value, and that value should be extracted from that information. Just because that this, going back to like, oh, there should be more mentoring, there should be more consulting, there just simply isn't the time for that. So going out there and looking for this information being freely available is, if you need to put a little picture of them next to you and then that's them consulting with you or mentoring you, take advantage of that, because that information is still solid, even though they're not telling it to you one-on-one. That information still has value. Another thing that was brought up in that chain from Rob Kinder was having more regular dev meetups, perhaps, to let smaller teams meet new people and ask advice in an encouraging
That is an awesome thing. And that's something that there should always be more dev meetups. I don't go to enough of them. I'm incredibly lazy. Well, no, sorry. I'm incredibly busy. That's why I need to... Yeah. That's the more honest
I think that's the more fair one to go with.
Yeah. But those are great. Those are
I know
great.
For me, once I'm in London, I know I will be going to more of those things, but
you'll probably go to more of those than I do, to be honest.
Yeah, but yeah. I will absolutely take I went to Boston postmortems all the time until it just, all of this started picking up and I just couldn't attend those anymore. And there were absolutely folks that I talked to there. It was, good relationship building. Yes, I talked to people and I didn't charge them for my time. It's so
you're very much the American on the podcast, aren't you, Alexander?
I am. I have a role to play.
You do.
That's been my thing all week. Is people are just you do a thing. I was yeah, I have a role to play, and I will play that role to the best of its ability. But yeah, I'm looking forward to and it's a very different environment for me as well, because there is a more concentrated culture with London than it is, being part of the Boston scene, which
for sure, yeah,
part of the American scene, which is ginormous.
London is super compressed, and I think that culturally has a big effect. And actually, I mean, in the UK, that's a problem because elsewhere, if you live and work elsewhere in the UK, often it can feel like you're not able to go to any of these events, and you can't. There's a cost and a time thing. I think regional events are getting better, but that's definitely something. If you are a developer who works in an area that doesn't have a meetup, start one. Even if it's just 2 or 3 of you around a table at the start. I think GDC famously the first year was 20 people. Go for it. Start building those communities, because if nothing else, the proliferation of indie game developers means you probably do live and work near another developer. And it's not always about, you don't have to get the big name game developer to come along to your event. Often it's actually super useful to talk to other people who are having the same challenges as you, who are struggling and working in the same kind of part of the industry as you are. That's often, I remember having much more inspiring and useful conversations with people who were kind of at the level I was, than when I met the superstar developer. They were cool and you got to meet your heroes. That's great. But in terms of actually getting advice, often the best advice comes from the other people who are at your stage in their careers or their company's growth or whatever.
Right. Because there's a lot more information exchange. And because of the way the system evolves so fast on in games, talking to someone who was part of those first couple indie waves is very different than talking to someone who was in mobile.
I'll tell you how to get successful in 2012. I can give great advice on how to release a game back in 2012. That's I'm solid on that.
But that's why maybe the business stuff isn't the great. I think that's really, on some level what this also comes down to is that the how to be successful in 2012 or how to be successful in 2014, which is what a lot of these conversations usually end up, when you really boil it down, they end up leading to, is not really the right sort of question to ask. It's how do I put the pieces together so that, I can I can grow my studio or, keep it sustainable or find a long-term solution so that I can stay in the game long enough to find that hit, because it's not going to be success on the first game. It's not going to be success on the second game. There is
and it's certainly not going to be success on every game.
Right.
Like a lot of people and conferences suggest that there is like a secret recipe to making a hit every time, and maybe that exists. I'm not clever enough for it, I suspect.
That's why my favorite one, and I wasn't even going to bring it up, but you opened the door, so I'm walking through it, was from James Parker, who said, write a post on Gamma Sutra that directly attributes your success to arbitrary decisions you made without taking into account other factors.
You need to meet James Parker, because he is, you would get on with him. He's got a very dry wit. He's a very sarcastic gentleman, and he's great.
Oh, that was my favorite, and I wasn't even going to bring it up. I used to work with him back
at Blitz. He's old school.
I wanna thank you for reading the freedom mail again. Thank you for reading the freedom mail again.
Hey, howdy, Alexander and Mike. Positive reinforcement, : Absolutely loving the podcast. Since I found it, it's become my go-to series to listen to while at work. Cool, thank you. Background, : I am a still quite junior game designer, and I'm working on a personal project that I think is small but interesting, and I'm satisfied that early prototyping is working well. I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, in that I can produce passable to decent pixel art, sprite animations, music, and audio, in addition to programming and design.
Oh, cool. You're a jack of more trades than me.
Yeah, as much as I would like to bring on artists and musicians to produce really good stuff early on, I'm working on a shoestring budget. However, to generate interest about the game, players and contributors, I feel the temporary art audio is necessary. Question, : I suppose I would like to hire on people purely for polish reasons. An artist to look over and improve current assets, someone to mix master current audio, maybe even someone to look over my code for optimization. Is this type of contribution common? Is it insulting to ask, quote, make my stuff better, rather than, quote, make new stuff? What would a contract for that look like? Thank you kindly, Jared. Bonus question for Mike. Do you ever pocket a word for later to use when you get the in the last word, as it always seems spontaneous? Is it stressful to keep producing quality last words to not disappoint listeners? So take that one first.
Well, first, now it is. Now you put the pressure on me. I always just look around my room. Whenever I do that, that's off like the book I'm reading or the packaging for whatever I ate for lunch. It's not really, honestly, that thought out. It's just the most interesting work in my peripheral vision. That's how I do it. There's a lesson there about game dev as well.
So I will take the contract one first, and then we'll work backwards.
Sure.
So what would a contract like that look like? The contract should obviously name the person, details, cover the work. If you have any type of attorney or attorney friend, they can certainly get you a boilerplate contract that specifies what the work entails specifically, and you agree upon payment terms and all those aspects. So the contract is relatively straightforward, but if you have any type of access to a professional who can provide you that, yes, strongly recommend that over handshakes and emails. So let's go back to the, is this type of contribution common? So essentially someone to mix master the current audio, look over the code, improve current assets.
It is common. It's super common. It's so common we do it.
Yep.
So the two examples I'd point out are with a coder on Volume. I wrote all the gameplay code, all of that core stuff. But I was definitely not up to the challenge with server side and a little bit of the UI stuff. So I brought in coders to kind of help with that. But actually also in the process, they also optimized the game, fixed gameplay bugs, did a bunch of other work. Coders, it's a very easy ask because most video game coders are used to working with other people, and one of the things all coders do is fix other people's work. It's a big part of how that has always worked with multiple coders on a team. So don't worry about that one. Coders, it's a very easy ask. It is trickier with the art side. I think the first thing to say would be that I'm assuming you're paying people. The only reason I ask that is because if you're paying people up front, frankly, they'll do what you want because you're paying them. If it's more of a collaboration, more of kind of a revenue split or a friend doing a friend a favor or whatever, that's where you probably have to worry more about, is this work fun? Just because obviously you're asking someone to put maybe their own personal time into something, or, well, I mean, frankly, until you pay them, it's all their personal time. So there is that ask. But assuming that you are paying folk, it's really just about being clear about what they're doing and respecting what they do. So a good example of this would be the Google project we did last year, Earthshape. I actually myself, because it started off kind of, we were thinking in more of a 2D direction with some of the stuff in there. So I'd already concepted out what the spaceship looked like and what the astronaut looked like, and Starseeker as they were eventually called. I'd already made like little concept art of that because I like do a little bit of illustration, graphic design stuff. Definitely not good enough to be in a video game, but I had some ideas and I put them down. And then when Daz joined, who's the concept artist I work with on pretty much everything, his job really was to take what I'd done and make it good. Polish it up, similar to what you're saying, polish it up, work out that, so that it could be good enough for a 3D artist to kind of come in and do. So he wasn't developing those concepts from scratch, he was kind of, cleaning up my idea. And he was fine with that because, I mean, in his case, he's an artist who enjoys iteration, but he's also, frankly, he was being paid. So it's, I think that's the big thing it comes down to, is if you're paying a professional to do something, then frankly, as long as you respect the work they do, as long as things like making sure that they get the right credits, that when you're talking about the game and publicizing it, you're not going up to people and saying, well, obviously I came up with this. An example that would be Earthshape. I think that's the first time I've mentioned publicly that I even did a first pass on that character, because out of respect for the artist, obviously the version that's in the game is not mine, and therefore when you're doing interviews and stuff, making sure that that's clear to who you're talking to. If anything, actually, frankly, not mentioning in interviews, letting them take the credit, because ultimately, obviously, they've transformed it, they've made it better. So I think that would be my advice: would be to just kind of respect the person you're working with, and express to them kind of what that iteration you need is, but understand that they're not just making your stuff. You said it in a jokey way, but kind of they're not just making your stuff better; they're reinventing it. They're making at that point. I would give creative ownership to them of that. You're saying, well, this is now something that this person made rather than myself. So if you're willing to do that and give them that respect, then I don't think you'll have too much trouble with it.
If you have a burning question about games, game development, or just about the complexities of the universe, you can send those questions to us via contact@BithelGames.com. That's contact@BithelGames.com, through the YouTube comments of this show, or on Twitter by pinging @MikeBithell or @Slewinski. Again, thank you so much for all the new letters. We absolutely would have hit more of them this week, except that I have a vet appointment I have to get my dog the last thing that he needs to be able to get onto the plane, which has to be done within a specific window that is more than 24 hours but less than 5 days. Yes, it is a lot of work trying to get a pet over the ocean. Anyway, thanks for listening to this episode of the Bithell Games Podcast. We can always use your support, so please provide reviews and 5 stars on iTunes, likes and subscribes on YouTube. Again, a lot of good feedback on YouTube. And positive reinforcement on whatever other platforms you're hearing this show on whenever possible, especially the bagel stuff. They really like the bagel stuff. Bagels. Toasted bagels, bacon, egg, and cheese.
Very popular over here, bagel. Very popular.
This podcast was produced by Jonathan Downen. We'll be back next week. Yes, we will. Oh, I have so much anxiety about flying. We will be back next week.
Well,
yes.
I will be at least.
At least Mike will be back next week. I was Alexander Slinsky. Thanks again, and get in the last word.
Heritage.